I should also tell you about my father's parents and grandparents. I really knew I didn't know any of them, but my great-grandparents were Sophie and Frederick, and they came from Germany. So I'm Irish and German, I guess. And Frederick came over with Sophie, but she didn't live very long. And then they had a son, George, and 3 other boys, Dick and Dita, we called him. I don't know what Dita's name is. And I think there were 4 altogether boys. And my dad was born from George. And George's wife was Lillian. And so she died when she was like 30, very, very young. And I remember the story of my father telling me that George and he came in home from work one day, or came back home, and they found Lillian laying on the floor dead, which was a terrible shock, of course, to my father and to my grandfather. So that was a bad thing to happen, and I don't remember ever meeting any of the other parents. And George, I remember just holding me in his arms when I was little, like for my first birthday or something like that. And then all the other aunts and uncles, they all settled in Appleton, Wisconsin. And I don't really know if my grandfather Frederick and Sophie lived in Appleton. I imagine if their children were all there, they came over. But I think my grandfather was born in America, probably in Appleton. And that's how they all started going to Appleton in the summertime. When George decided to go into business, he went to Chicago and founded a business with another man, which I'll let Dad tell about that, because he knows all the details, where I never talked to my dad about that business.
Yeah.
And
did you ever know where they came from in Germany?
you know, I think I knew when Kate and Jordan were over there.
Oh.
And I think I looked it up or something and found out, but I can't come up with the name.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know where it was. I remember going to Germany and never really feeling like they were from this area or that area. So I'm not quite sure.
And then on Nana's side,
Yes.
you knew both of her parents, but what about her grandparents? Did you know who they were, or?
I did know Grandma Hegeman was my grandmother, Tillis's, her mother. And I have pictures of me as a little baby being held by my great-grandmother.
Oh.
What was her, I can't remember her first name, Hegeman.
Okay.
Was her last. She was married to a Hegeman, which is German. And she looked so old to me at the time. And now I'm a great-grandmother, and I think, do I look like Grandma Hegeman?
You definitely do not look like Grandma Hegeman.
And I think it's amazing how every generation seems to get younger. You fellows at being grandparents, you don't look like grandparents at all. And probably we didn't either. I was 49 when Brendan was born, so that's pretty young.
Very young.
But I don't remember who she was married to or his name. And I always, for some reason, that it didn't interest me to go back and find out all those things.
Yeah.
But I do know that I was named after my 2 aunts. My dad has a sister, Lorraine, and my mom had a sister, Grace. So I got the name Grace Lorraine. And I liked my name all the time. I always liked my name, and I liked the name Getcho, and I always loved the fact that I was in the middle of the alphabet, so that when you had to be called for something, I was sort of in the middle. And so that worked out well.
Yeah.
But Aunt Grace was quite different from my mother, and my mother was more the serious type. Except, I must admit, I've heard stories about my mother, and she would go out in these convertibles with her dates, and they'd be filled up with people, and they'd go down. She even showed me the building on Lakeshore Drive that she supposedly was swinging from the drapes.
Now, this was a roaring 1920s
The
that
20s.
she's talking about.
Yeah. Wow.
But it just seemed so, I mean, I knew Nana was a lot of fun, but I thought, wow, you were swinging from the drapes. She said, well, you know, and then we heard the parents coming home, and we had to jump off the balcony into the convertible car. And I couldn't believe my mother did that.
And this was the Olson Rug Company, which was a big company here in Chicago,
Yes.
Oh, right.
building homes, and is still around.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was sort of interesting, that story, and I do remember too, as I had mentioned earlier, I was afraid of spiders. And I remember my mom up in Appleton calling me and saying, sis, she'd call me sis. Sis, look out the window. And I looked out the window, and she had her arm out, and a daddy long leg was running up her arm. She said, it doesn't hurt at all. And it just made me feel even worse. I thought, oh. So the one way they could keep me in Appleton at that time, or I had to stay because I was told that was where I was going to be, but I wanted to be home because all my friends would go to Ravinia and different places. But my mom took me to the woolen mills in Appleton, and we bought all this pretty yarn cloth to make skirts.
Oh.
So my mom showed me how to sew and how to make skirts and do some sewing. And I'd always have new skirts that I knew nobody else had, because they'd have to get theirs at Bramson's or someplace that everybody could go to, where nobody had my skirt.
That's
So I
great.
liked that.
Yeah.
And I didn't have many friends up in Appleton, because it was just all the farmers' kids that didn't seem to, Lee liked them. Lee identified perfectly with them. And I wasn't a snob in any way, but I just thought they talked differently and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And I didn't seem to relate to them as much.
And how old were you at that time?
I was probably, I was 5th and 6th, 7th grade, that type of grammar school.
Yeah.
And
But they had been going to Appleton since she was her first steps were filmed at Appleton.
Oh, right.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
And we used to have Lillian Shively came up to sort of be the cook and take care of Lee and me when we were a little older, just that an adult was in the house with us. And she was really lots of fun. She was from Marquette, Michigan. And she came down, and actually her husband, Roger, was my dad's secretary.
Oh.
And so that's how they got to know Lillian. So Lillian came, and at nighttime she would bribe Lee and me that it was time to go to bed. And we were in the same bedroom up front with the lake you could hear in the background and see out your bedroom windows. And she'd come in and she'd say, I have to have you get ready for bed now. It's bedtime. Your parents will be home soon. And if you get in bed right away, I'll bring you up a treat. And we all thought, oh, I wonder what she's going to bring. So anyway, we would be in bed, and then she would come up with something in her hand. So we knew it was a little treat. She had just something in her hand. So she would come over and we'd say, tell us a story. And she'd tell us a story about her childhood up in Michigan.
Oh.
And it was always very adventuresome. And then she'd say, open your mouth. We'd open our mouth, she'd put a grape in our mouth.
Oh,
And that was our treat. But we didn't balk at it. We thought it was pretty neat just to get a treat. And it was wonderful having Lillian there, and she was a wonderful cook. And we always ate in the dining room for breakfast, and lunch was to the kitchen, and dinner was in the dining room. And we had such a wonderful time when we were there with everybody. I liked it when guests came. And then when the guests would leave, I'd be so sad.
oh.
Say, it's just us again. So, let me think what else I can tell you.